Do you love hexagons? Do you love Quilt as you go? Do you think we can put these two things together? We sure can. Stick around, and in this tutorial, I'll show you how to make the Quilt as you go Hexie Table Runner Bed Runner. So let's get started, and I'll show you what supplies you need to make this table runner. So the first thing you're going to need are some beautiful batik fabrics like these from Island Batik. These came in a package where they were rolled up in 5-inch strips. And then you're also going to need some yardage. This is a black batik from Island Batik. So those are the fabrics that you need. Then you're also going to need some batting that you can cut into strips. And this is Hobbs Premium Cotton polyester blend, which is one of my favorite battings. You're going to need a cutting mat like this one from Olfa. You're going to need a straight edge ruler like this one from Creative Grids. This one is called the Quick Trim and Circle Ruler. Another ruler that you're going to need would be the Hexagon by Jaybird Quilts. And if you don't happen to have this particular ruler, any ruler that will cut out hexagons from strips in a 4.5-inch and 6.5-inch size will work. You're also going to need a rotary cutter like this one from Quilters Select. You're going to need some type of a snip. You're going to need some black thread like this wonderful black thread from Aurifil. You're going to need some clips like these clover clips. And you're going to need an iron. And the last thing that you will need will be a sewing machine like this trusty little Hello Kitty from Janome. So those are the supplies you need. Gather them and let's get started. Now, to make the Quilt as you go hexagons, you need 3 things. You need a larger background hexagon, and this would be the right side of the fabric. Now, these happen to be batik, so it's hard to tell which is the right side, but basically the right side would go down, the wrong side would be up. Then you need a piece of batting that's cut in the shape of a hexagon, and you need the smaller hexagon. And so the way you get those hexagons is with the Hexagon ruler. And this was designed by Julie Herman from Jaybird Quilts. And it's called the Hexagon ruler. And with this ruler you can do hexagons from 2.5 inches to 4.5 inches to 6.5 to 8.5. And for this particular quilt that I'm making, I'm going to be using the 4.5, which is used to make the smaller hexagons, and the 6.5, which is used to make the larger. So I'll show you how I do that. First of all, we need a strip of fabric, and the instructions for that ruler tell you that the strip of fabric needs to be 4.5 inches for the smaller ones. So I'm going to get this lined up, and then I'm going to trim this down to 4.5 inches. I need to get my straight edge ruler to do that. So you cut the strip to the exact size that you need. Your hexagons are 4.5 inch from the top to the bottom. And so we're making this strip that size, and then you'll see how the ruler works with that strip. So I'm just going to line up my straight edge along here and cut one edge off. And these strips are from Island Batik. They come as 5-inch strips, which means that there's going to be very little waste by using these strips to make this quilt. So I put the half mark there and here. and trim this off. And we now have a strip that is 4.5 inches from top to bottom. So then we take our hex and more ruler, and we're looking for this hexagon right here. That's the 4.5 inch one, because that's, in what I showed you a second ago, that's the smaller one here. So the smaller one and the batting are cut at the 4.5 inch hexagon. So you take the ruler and you place the top line, the top solid line of the 4.5 hexagon on the top of the strip, and then the other solid line at the bottom along there. And we're going to I do this backwards because I'm left-handed, so it'll actually be easier for me to do it this way. But actually, the way I had it was good. I just needed to have the ruler upside down. So we're going to put it like that. I'm going to put the ruler upside down, so we're still going to have the 4.5 inch solid, the 4.5 hexagon solid line there, and the other solid line there. If you were right-handed, you would probably have it this way, and because I'm left-handed, I have it upside down. But it still works either way. So I want to make sure that I'm past these salvages on this end, and I'm lining up the solid line there and the solid line down here, and then I'm just going to trim off this side here. Pull that away, and then I'm going to take this and turn it 180 degrees and place the hex and more ruler back on it. So this time I'm lining up this whole, the bottom and this whole edge, I'm lining up with what's already been cut. So I have that along there, this along the top, and along that right hand side. And you get it lined up, and then we're going to cut off these other two edges. And now I have, because this was folded so that it was a layer of 4, I have 4 perfectly cut out 4.5 inch hexagons. And I'm just flipping them now so that I have the right sides facing up, so I know which side is the right side. You actually can kind of tell a little bit with batiks. Like if you notice this side is a little bit lighter in the design, and then when I flip it over, it seems a little darker and a little more intense. That's one way you can tell if you have the right side of the batik showing. So the other thing that we need now would be the larger hexagons. So then to cut the larger hexagons, we need a 6.5 inch strip, and I have this one folded so that there's 4 layers for this one as well. So now we're going to use the larger hexagon. It's going to be hard to see against the black, but it's the 6.5 inch hexagon. And so again, we're going to put it so that we're past the salvages there. We're going to look for that. Oh, I need to do it upside down. So again, right-handed, you do it the normal way, and if you're left-handed, you do it upside down. So again, I have this edge of the 6.5 hexie, so that it's so that I'll end up cutting off the salvage when I'm done with it. And then I'm going to take and put that along there, and the black line is along the top there, and we're going to cut off these 2 edges. And then we're going to flip it 180 degrees, and again line up this edge of the hexamore ruler. Let me turn off that overhead light, that might help. And we still have some glare, but so again, I want the 6.5 solid black line to be lined up with the top, and the solid black line down here on the bottom to be lined up. And then I'm going to shove this over so that it lines up with my previous cuts. You can kind of tell, even though it's black on black, you can tell when you're no longer seeing the green mat through there. And then we're going to cut off these two sides. There we go. And so now we have 6 perfectly cut out larger hexagons, and again I'm going to put them so that they're all facing right side up. And then I know that when I pick them up, I have to flip them upside down so that the right side will be down. And the last part of this that we need would be the batting, which are going to be cut at the smaller hexagon. And so for that, we need a strip of batting that's been cut at 4.5 inches. So this one, the width of it is 4.5 inches. So I'm going to move it down here like this. You can see the edge there. And again, we're going to be using the 4.5 half hexie, or the whole hexie, and because I'm left-handed, I'm doing it upside down. So I'm going to place this edge where this part's going to get cut off. I will put the black line, solid line on the bottom, and the black line along the top. And the batting is a little bit harder to cut precisely. Like, try to cut it in a 4.5 strip as best you can, but it is a little bit more difficult because the batting kind of squishes and expands, and so you do the best that you can. And you can probably see that I'm like a little bit, I'll move this up a little bit for you. You can probably see that I'm a little bit inside the batting, so that my batting is probably slightly larger than the than what the fabric will be, but I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference because the batting will just kind of mush in there when we sew it together. And so that's how you cut out your batting strips. The next step is we have to lay all these things together, and we have to get them accurately placed or centered within the hexagon. So what I mean by that is we start with this one again. The right side is facing down and the wrong side is facing up. Then try to put your batting in the middle as best you can. And what I do is I look at these corners and try to line these corners up in all the corners. And then the next thing I do is I take my regular straight edge ruler, and I want to use the side where I can easily identify an inch, and I'm going to take and line this up so that I put the inch along the edge of that larger black hexagon, and you can see there's a little gap there. So I'm going to take and move this down just a little bit because we need to have a 1-inch border all the way around here. And then I'm going to rotate this and put the inch again along the edge of the black there and scooch it over a little bit. Go to the next one. And scooch it over. Do this one. Looks pretty good. And then this is the last one. And that looks pretty good. So basically by doing that, I've now identified that I have a 1-inch border going around my batting. And then you're going to take and lay your good fabric, in this case it's my batik from Island Batik, on top of that batting and get it right on there, so we now know that that's centered as well. And then I don't want it to shift when I'm ironing and sewing, so I am going to take and put a pin in the middle. And then the next thing is where we start ironing, and then I'm going to put clips around this and then sew it on the sewing machine. So the next step is I will show you how I do the ironing. I prepare a bunch of these hexies with the smaller hexagon, the batting, and the larger hexagon pinned together. And I prepare them so that I have a bunch of them ready to go at the sewing machine. So I want to show you how I do that. So I basically take the larger one and press it over the edge of the hexagon. So that edge right there, I'm pressing it over the edge and just making a nice little crease like that. Then I'm going to take and fold it so that it meets, so that the top edge here of the black hexagon is going to meet the edge of the smaller hexagon right like that. And then you can finger press it if you want, which will speed up the process, or you can actually press it as well. And then we fold it one more time so that it folds on top of the smaller hexagon, and then I take these small clover clips and put them on like that. So then we move to the next one, and we go in a counterclockwise direction, and I'll show you why that comes in handy in a little bit. So now we're going to take this one and press it so that it folds over the edge of the hexagon. Just like that. And then we're going to press this one in again to meet the edge of the smaller hexagon. So the top of the black is there right next to the edge of the hexagon, and we're going to fold that over again and clip it. And we just keep rotating counterclockwise. So now we're going to take this again and we're going to fold this over on top of this edge right here like that and give it a press. And then we will fold this top edge again in to meet the top of the smaller hexagon like that, and give it a finger press and fold it over on top of the smaller hexagon and clip. Rotate counterclockwise again. Fold it so that it meets this edge of the smaller hexagon. Make sure you have nice sharp points in the corner there. Give that a press. Fold it so that this top edge meets the small hexagon again. Finger press it, or you can press it with the iron if you want. This speeds up the process to finger press it. And then clip it. Rotate counterclockwise again. Fold it over on top of the smaller hexagon. Give it a press. Fold it so that it meets the edge of the small one again, and then fold it over on top of the small hexagon. And so I've used small clover clips all the way around, and then for this last one I'm going to use a larger clover clip, and I'll show you why in just a second. So again, we fold this one over on top of the small hexagon and give it a press. And then we're going to fold it in to meet like that, and then on top of itself again. Now the reason I used the large is to identify that this was the last one. the last edge that I pressed in, because what will happen is if I start sewing here, I'm going to go on top of that flap that's right there. And then if I sew along here, I'm going to go on top of that flap. And all the way around, I'll keep going on top of these flaps. So it makes it really easy to keep sewing and not have to worry about whether things are tucked in, because they're already tucked in the way they belong. But when you get to this last one again, notice how this one, the flap is not going the same direction as it was here. So this one could possibly lift up, so you have to use a stiletto or something to make sure that that's flat when you finally sew over that one. And that's how I prepare them. And I just do a bunch of those, and then I go to the sewing machine, and then I repeat and do a bunch more of these, and then go to the sewing machine, and before you know it, you'll have enough done to make your table runner. So here's one of the Quilt As You Go Hexies that we're making, and I'm going to show you how I sew these now. And the nice thing about them is that they're all quilted now. So this is quilted and ready to be joined to another unit, and when it gets all joined, the quilt will already be quilted. Now if you wanted to get really fancy, you could do some additional quilting inside the Hexie. So the foot that I'm using on my Janome Memory Craft 6600 is called a blind hem foot, and you can see that it has a little lip there, a little edge that's kind of in the middle of the foot. And so that is going to ride along the edge. That black foot is going to ride right along the edge of that fabric, and that's going to give me a nice top stitch along here. So you'll notice that I've put smaller clips all the way around and a larger clip here. The purpose for that was to tell me that this was the last piece that I turned over. So I'm going to start here, and you can see there's a flap, so that will easily go over that flap. And then there's a flap here, the machine will easily go over this, and that one, and that one, and that one. And the only point where it will be a problem, and you'll see when we get there, is going to be this one, because it does not have a flap over, and so we have to be careful that one doesn't get caught. So I'm going to put this foot back on the machine. Okay. Get my thread back in there, and then I'm going to take and line this up so that that black lip that's on this foot is riding right along the edge of this black fabric. I'm going to take a couple stitches, then I'm going to back stitch to lock that in place, and then I'm going to stitch till I get down to this corner right here. And when I get there, I'm going to lift the presser foot and turn, and again line up that black edge so that it's right up against the edge of the fabric, and make sure that I have a nice good corner down here. And so until I get to that corner. When I'm there, I'm going to lift the presser foot and turn again, line up that black edge, and make sure that these pieces are lining up here, and stitch down to the next corner. And you can kind of tell when you're getting to the corner because your little edge is right there. So I just remove the clips, hold everything in place, and sew down to the next corner. So this is really a pretty easy sewing project, and it's going to end up creating a pretty magnificent quilt. So this is the one where the flap is not going to go over, so I have to be really careful to hold that piece down. And one way you can be sure you do that is to take your stiletto or a seam ripper, or this is called a purple thing, and just kind of hold it on that piece so that as it starts to go under there, it will be held in place. And you can see it started to get caught there. So I'm going to keep going till I get to the corner, and then I'm going to turn it, and then stitch down to where I first started stitching. And then I'm going to back stitch, pull out the pin, and then you want to clip these threads so that you don't have to do it later. There'll be one there, and typically there's one in the same spot on the back. So we want to clip those. And then you can see we have a nicely quilted hexagon that's ready to be put in the quilt. Now I have all of the hexagons prepared and they've been quilted. They all have the black sewn around to the front, and there's batting in the middle, and you can see they're not stitched together. So the next thing is you need to lay them out in some sort of a pleasing arrangement. And you can see I have like the colors spaced out fairly evenly. So that's going to make a pleasing arrangement. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew them in diagonal rows like this. I'm going to take and go like this. And then I'll sew this one together, and then it'll be easy to sew this one onto this row, and then onto this row, and onto this row. So that's the order in which I'm going to start sewing them together, and they're going to be sewn together with a zigzag stitch. So what I'm going to show you now is how to sew a couple of the hexagons together with a zigzag stitch. So I have my machine set to a regular zigzag stitch. It's mode to stitch 8, and I didn't change any of the settings. It's just the basic setting on the machine for a zigzag stitch. And so I'm going to lift the presser foot up and hold on to my thread. And then I'm going to get these lined up, and I'm going to put it so that the two edges are lined up right in the middle of the foot. And then I'm going to put the presser foot down and the presser foot down and start zigzagging. And then I'm going to back stitch a little because we want to make this real sturdy. Then I'm going to go forward and just make sure that where the two edges are meeting, that it's right in the center of the foot. And then at the other end, I'm also going to back stitch again and go forward and then cut. Now, because there's so many of these going together, I clip the threads at this point because otherwise it would be a pretty monotonous task once you've got them all sewn together. So I clip them at this point. And then you just take the next one and line it up and do the same thing until you've stitched it together and you've got a row. So now I have a couple of rows that have been stitched. And they go together like this where the top two are lined up. And so now I'm going to show you how I stitch the rows together. So you can see I have two rows. They're going to line up like this, and now I'm going to stitch in between them like this. So again, I'm going to get my thread ready and get them lined up like this. And go needle down, start with the zigzag, and then back stitch, go forward again. And as you're going forward, you just want to make sure that your needle is going on either side so it's catching the fabric from both of the hexagons. And then I just keep making sure that the hexagons are lining up as I'm going. If you want to, you can put a pin in like this that will hold, you know, a couple of pieces together in place, but I found that that's not necessary. But you can do it if you want to. And then when I get down here to the intersection, I'm going to go needle down and pivot and get those center lines, again, right in the center of my foot. And just go down this one until I get to the next intersection. And then I pivot again and get everything lined up. And just stitch along like this. And when I get to the intersection, stop. It looks like for some reason I wasn't sewing there, so I'm going to have to check to see like if it's my bobbin thread, but for some reason it's not going together. Okay, so what happened was my thread broke, and so I needed to rethread the machine. And basically the point where it broke was right at an intersection, so no worries if that happens. I'm just going to start from there, and basically it'll cover over the existing thread so it'll all be secure. So again, I'm going to go needle down. I'm right in the intersection. And I'm making sure that the needle is going back and forth on both the fabric on both of these hexagons. I realize that the thread is black and the fabric is black, so you can't really see it, but I didn't want to use a different color because it would wreck this project if I did. But so I just keep going until I get to the intersection. Then I go needle down and pivot. And again, I'm making sure that all these things are going to line up in the right place. And if they don't, it doesn't really matter because the zigzag stitch kind of smushes everything together and smooths it all out. So it doesn't matter if all of your hexagons are not perfectly the same size. I mean, they should be close, but the zigzag stitch kind of pulls it all together. The main thing is just to be careful that you're getting fabric on both sides so that you're catching both of the hexagons. Sometimes if you go too far, you have to back up a little bit so that you can get where you're in the center again. As you can see, it goes fairly quickly. And again at the end, I'm going to backstitch. And then cut at the end. So you can see here that this one did not line up perfectly, and it's not going to matter because, well, actually on this one it will matter because this one happens to be an edge, but if another piece was being sewn on here, it would all get smushed in. So there it is. That's, you sew the rows together like that, and you just keep going across the quilt until you get the whole thing done. So these are the two hexagons that I just showed you that I sewed together, and these other pieces will get added onto this so that this will become a complete row. So here is a complete row, and you'll notice how the rows line up with each other at the top like this. There's another complete row. Here's where I've taken and sewn two rows together, and so it makes it easy to do that. And then, like, if you have these two together, I'm going to sew these two to this two. And then here's where I've taken and sewed two rows together here and two rows together here, and I've sewn them all together. And if you look up close, you can't really see the zigzag stitches because I used black thread, and that really hides it. So if you're doing a bad job of stitching, it doesn't really show. And here's what it looks like from the back. Now it has some lint on it, but basically it just looks like a quilted piece of quilt. And obviously if I had quilted inside each of these, there would be more quilting that would show up on the back. But so you just keep going across, sewing these columns together until you've gone the whole way across the table runner and completed the whole thing. So when we come back, I'll show you the completed table runner. So here is the table runner or bed runner all completed, and you can see that it's quilted, and there's nothing further to do on this. I don't have to put any binding around it. And here's what it looks like from the back. There may be a little bit of lint, but you can see it clearly gives it like a quilted look on the back as well. And so in a second I'll show you what this looks like on a bed. I promised I'd show you it lying on the bed. No, the bed runner, I mean. Isn't it beautiful? Here's what the bed runner or table runner looks like on a bed. You can see it makes a nice long runner, as this is a king-size bed, and it definitely fits the whole end of the bed. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on how to make the Quilt As You Go Hexie table runner or bed runner. If you have, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell so you'll be notified of future videos. And you should see some other videos that I suggest that you might like to watch. And if you click on those, it will take you to those videos. So we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.